Hi everybody, and welcome back to Virtual Storytime at the Castle Shannon Library. This is our regularly scheduled songs and stories time at 10:30 on Thursdays, and this is our video that goes with the activities that are on the website today. So we were originally supposed to read a book called New York Melody by Helen Dravert, and this was for the letter N in our alphabet series. But unfortunately, that is not a book that we have here at Castle Shannon. And we are not switching books within libraries right now. You can't get books delivered from other libraries. Even though we're back here at the library, we're preparing to start to do curbside services, but those have to be materials that we have right here at our library. And this book, New York Melody, was one that I was going to order from somewhere else. Unfortunately, we can't get that here for today, and I don't have an iPad or something to get it to look to see if it's on overdrive. So we're going to substitute just a little bit of a smidge. We're gonna read this book. It's called The City Girls. So we're just gonna pretend that this takes place in New York City. It probably actually is supposed to take place in New York City, even though it's not in the title. So we're gonna substitute with this. This is called The City Girls, and it's by a Kai or a Key. I've never heard this person's name said out loud before, so I am not quite sure how to pronounce it. I probably should have looked that up before I started filming. But anyway, this is The City Girls, and just pretend that this takes place in New York so that it can fit our New York theme for the alphabet series. So it says, meet the City Girls, and there's a lot of them. We have Laura, Miffy, Annie, Rebecca, Jane, Vanessa, June, Melanie, Sarah, Kathleen, Lucy, Zoe, Kirsten, Tilly, Joy, and Emily. It's morning time in the city. We watch the sun rise slow and pretty. I'm going to take the cover off of this book because otherwise I'm just going to be dropping it all over the place. Baked bread smells and coffee carts, doors roll up at supermarts. Busy men and women riding, busy kids with parents guiding. Everyone is crossing streets, lights and whistles, honks and tweets. Uh-oh, we feel drops of rain. Down we go, we'll take the train. And that might be how you really know it might take place in New York City, because they have a subway. Minutes later, here's our stop. It's our favorite bookshop. At the museum, we show our passes. We take a tour and wave at classes. Everyone's hungry, we file inside. Eggs over easy, poached and fried. The park is filled with flowers. Around its edges stand tall towers. The sun is setting, we leave the park. We must go home before it's dark. Taxis race us side by side. We thank our drivers for the ride. Back upstairs, it's such a sight. Bright lights on a city night. And then it says, more to explore, life inside and outside the city. Communities of people form in all different environments, buildings and structures. In the city, buildings are often close together. They tend to be tall and sometimes they are skyscrapers, very tall buildings of many stories. In the suburbs, buildings are often more spread out. They tend to be shorter. In the country, buildings are often far apart. Whether farmland, woodland, plains, or deserts, there tends to be more open land without buildings. So in big cities, like in downtown Pittsburgh and New York City, places like that, buildings are pretty close, really close together. Some are even built right side by side, smack against each other. And some of them are really tall skyscrapers, like the U.S. Steel Tower, the Empire State Building. In the suburbs, which is where we are in Castle Shannon, buildings are a little bit further apart and they're a little bit smaller. So if you think about downtown Castle Shannon, buildings are a little further apart. The library is kind of further apart from the houses and the school over here, and buildings aren't very tall. They're only a couple stories tall. In the country, which is more out, the closer you get maybe to Burgettstown or West Virginia, things start to get further apart. And out where there's farmland, you know, the houses are way far apart and buildings are way farther apart, and people have a lot of land to play on and farm on and live on. In plant life, it says, in the city there are often few plants. They tend to be in parks or other green areas. In the suburbs, there are more plants. Grass lawns and trees can be big or small. In the country, there are often lots of plants. Nature is everywhere. So if you think about a city, if you think about in downtown Pittsburgh, there's trees planted every now and again. There's not a ton of lawn space except for in like Shenley Park and other parks like that. Here in Castle Shannon, we have grass around the library. People have grass in front of their houses. There's trees, there's flowers, and there's definitely more of it than there is downtown. But if you go out into the country, there's big, wide open fields, lots of plants and flowers, even some vegetables, maybe even some fruit that is growing. So there's way more plants out there. Housing and homes. In the city, people often live close together in apartments. There tend to be many separate homes in one building. In the suburbs, people often live in houses or apartments in neighborhoods. In the country, people often live in houses farther apart from one another. So housing in a big city, especially like New York, almost everybody that lives in New York City lives in an apartment. If not, they live in huge houses because they have a whole lot of money. But most people live in apartments. Apartment buildings in New York City are really tall and really huge and have a lot of apartments in them. Pittsburgh has some like that too, not quite as big as New York City, but the downtown Pittsburgh has some like that. In the suburbs, again, out here, most people live in houses, smaller houses, sometimes bigger houses, but not quite as big as like really big houses like you might see in New York City. And the apartment buildings out here, they're not quite as tall. Some people live in townhouses too, which are houses that are connected to each other kind of in a row, but everybody has their own house. So it's not quite like an apartment where you go in one big door and then there's all these little rooms, but that's another kind of housing you get in the suburbs. In the country, people normally live in big farmhouses that are single houses, maybe not even 2 stories, just 1 story, but they are way further apart from everything else. Transportation. In the city, there's often public transportation, buses or subways that help people get around. People also walk and bicycle between places. In the suburbs, there is sometimes public transportation like buses. Often people drive cars or personal vehicles. In the country, it is more common for people to drive cars or personal vehicles. So in cities, and this isn't super common in Pittsburgh, but in New York City, a lot of people walk almost everywhere. They take taxis, they take Ubers, they take the subway. So people don't have a whole lot of use for cars in huge cities unless they are leaving the city to get out. In New York City, when I went there too, it was something strange. I never saw a gas station the whole time I was there. So that's how much people really don't drive cars in really big cities. Pittsburgh's a little bit different because even though we do have the T, we do have buses, we have Uber, a lot of people, even people that live downtown, have their own cars. Out here, a lot of people have their own cars, trucks, motorcycles. We do have the T that runs through Castle Shannon, and we do have bus stops, but it's less common than downtown. And out in the country, like out in Greensburg, out in Burgettstown, they might get bus service, but it's very, very few and far between. And a lot of people, if they want to go anywhere, they have to have their own car. So that is it for our story. So not only did we get to see the little city girls travel through the city, we got to learn the difference between city, suburb, and country life. So if you enjoyed that story, you can come back again at 11:30 or at 4 o'clock for 2 other story times where we are going to be reading stories about New York. We hope you're having a good day, and we'll see you back at the library soon.